worried by the turn of events over the National Convention of the ruling All Progressives Congress, the APC. Governors elected on the platform of the party are billed to meet tonight in Abuja to take a final stand on the matter, as well as decide whether to go ahead or shift the date of the convention. Some of the governors who seem unhappy with both the president and the party leadership hinted that the meeting tonight would be the final one on the convention and the outcome may be unpleasant, as a majority of them were ready to go all out. Party sources, who also hinted at some of the happenings in the APC, however, pointed that Imo State Governor Uzodinma and his Kogi State counterpart, Yahaya Bello, as the arrowheads of those pushing for a postponement of the convention. But whether or not the president agrees to go ahead with the convention as scheduled for this weekend after tomorrow's meeting, some members of the party were alleged to have started shopping for an injunction to stop the exercise from holding. Meanwhile, all things being equal, the president may in fact sign the reworked Electoral Act Amendment Bill today, but on the condition that the National Assembly would amend the contentious Clause 84, which infringes on the constitutional rights of certain categories of people. Buhari last night decided to lay the issues stalling the Electoral Act Amendment Bill to rest when he seized the initiative and met with the leadership of the National Assembly with a view to finding a middle ground and closing the deal once and for all. I do apologize there for stumbling over some words in the beginning with regards to the APC convention because I was confused, okay? The whole thing is confusing. I did manage with the Electoral Act Amendment Bill because that is quite clear. What on earth is going on in the APC? Will they or won't they? It's actually triggering a migraine. And we've been on this since last week, haven't we? And we've been told that there are three different groups or different schools of thought within the APC battling for supremacy. Should the convention go ahead on February 26th or should it be postponed? Should the May Malabuni's caretaker convention be further extended beyond, a period of time that it already has been? Will there be that consensus chairmanship candidate? So many issues, but it all just spells out the fact that the ruling party has not been able to get their act together. And that's always a really worrying signal. And I also wonder, now that we have INEC having to oversee by-elections this weekend, on Saturday, February 26th. Was it really wise of the APC to schedule their convention on the same day? And INEC had announced that those by-elections would hold on 14th of January. APC announced their convention will hold on the same day, on the 18th of January. So how was that detail overlooked? The whole thing just looks completely untidy and is causing me confusion. And I'm doing this for a living. I don't know how the general Nigerian public is reacting to all of this. Will they, won't they? With regards to the Electoral Amendment Bill before the president, this is really, hopefully, good news. I hope he does sign it. But that clause 84, which bars political appointees from voting or being voted for in their party's convention, effectively, removing them from the race as candidates, it is sort of unconstitutional in certain regards because you do have the rights as a Nigerian above a certain age with the requisite low academic qualifications, to contest in your own country. So barring people by virtue of this Section 84 was always, muddying the waters as far as I'm concerned. I don't think the National Assembly should even have ever added Clause 84. They should just have stuck to what the president pointed at. The only issue that he had with declining the bill the last time was with direct primaries, and he made that one observation. So I wish they had just, extended it and given more options with regards to primaries and left it at that. But we all know why that clause was added. And even the whole direct primary, we all know why that was added. People are trying to sort of curb the overbearing influence that some governors have on the political process.
Okay, when this re-amended Electoral Act Amendment Bill was passed before it was transmitted to the president on January the 31st, the main issue with what the National Assembly did with it was that the National Assembly members were trying, as you yourself have pointed out, curb the excesses of governors. And it wasn't surprising that we were told that shortly after, they sent that bill, the APC governors specifically kicked over two issues. One, Clause 84, which says that if you are a member of government, already a political appointee, for you to take part in the political process, you must resign your position. Previously, you could resign. You didn't have to resign your position. You can even go and run as a candidate. If you lost, you go back to your job. Okay? And they thought, the lawmakers who, inserted that clause 84, thought that these governors, they use political appointees to drive the process, to promote the Godfather principle, and to ensure that their will prevail, either at the primaries level or at the ward level or at the Congress level or at other levels within the political party. However, what observers pointed out is that that in itself violates the right of those political appointees to participate in the political process. It violates their right under Chapter 4 of the Constitution of the freedom of choice and their right with regard to the freedom of association. Okay, so what we're now being told is that this is what the president wants amended, so that delegates, political appointees can either take part in the process or also function as delegates. So is it automatic that a governor or a president or a vice president can dictate to his appointees where they go or what they choose within the democratic process? It's good that the president, we're told, is consulting with the leadership of the National Assembly on that particular clause. And we're told he met with the leadership of the National Assembly yesterday, and that he will meet with the governors tomorrow, and that today the governors themselves will meet in Abuja. All of that horse trading is part of the legislative process. I don't think there's anything out of place in that regard. The other contentious issue has to do with the definition of what consensus means, which was another thing that the lawmakers introduced. But in the report, front page of this day newspaper today, there wasn't any heavy weather with regard to that. What is the main concern is that the president is expected to sign the electoral bill today. And why is today important? Now, the bill was transmitted to him on January 31st. He has a window of 30 days. The window of 30 days would end on March the 2nd. But within the purview of the framework, the electoral framework, INEC is required to announce the schedule of the elections about 300 days, 360 days to the election. Now, if the president does not sign today, if the president does not sign tomorrow, if tomorrow passes, February 22, what it means is that INEC will have to adjust the schedule of elections, the timetable. So what it then means is that the elections cannot hold as already scheduled. We'll have to shift the dates forward. And that is why there has been pressure from civil society organizations. About 70 civil society organizations in Nigeria are on this matter. And they are saying that the president must see this electoral framework as part of his legacy. And why is that important? Clause 84 is not the only thing in that law. There are other, as proposed, there are other recommendations from the National Assembly that they think, including electronic transmission, including some other processes that have been fine-tuned, that are useful to ensuring the integrity, the credibility of the electoral process. And the main argument from civil society organizations, there are 70 of them, so I don't need to list them. That will waste our time. It's simply that a president that has shown courage in passing the disabilities prohibition, discrimination against disabled persons, bill, and a president who has also shown greater commitment with regard to the Petroleum Industry Act, even if that is controversial, should not shy away from also leaving a framework that will show that he really believes in moving the electoral process in Nigeria forward in terms of the framework. And that if he were to act differently, it will be assumed correctly. They argue that the Nigerian administration at this time is trying to supplant the democratic process. So clearly, that's not the kind of thing that President Muhammadu Buhari wants. So he's under pressure, not just from the governors who want him to either veto or negotiate, and also from civil society who believe that we should not miss this window of opportunity to move the needle with regard to the electoral process. You will now recall that with regard to the convention of the APC, that we had said on this program that, there are many tendencies within the APC. I like to describe them as, different coalitions, strange bedfellows that came together. And as those tendencies have always been at the level, something influencing relationships within the political party. Now the convention has been shifted, likely to be shifted, we're told, by another 2 weeks. Before the president traveled, we were told that some governors met with him on the issue of this convention. They wanted a categorical affirmation from him with regard to zoning, with regard to consensus, with regard to who out of the 12 major candidates that have come forward. And I've said that all those 12 candidates are from the north. None of them is from the south. So the president was supposed to give a signal. But the president was on his way to an EU-AU summit on peace, security, and governance in Brussels. A 2-day meeting from where, part of the outcome is that Nigeria is one of the 6 nations that will be part of the vaccine manufacturing hub under the auspices of the WHO and the COVAX alliance. Okay? So the president has gone to Brussels. He's back. He brought something home, something positive, but he has this unresolved matter within his party. So how they resolve it, would have to do also with the strength of the party, with the survival of the party, with the future of the party. And the president has expressed the concern about leaving behind a stronger platform that brought him to power. And so all of us will keep watching. The average APC man will tell you, it's a family affair. We'll resolve it. I hope they are able to resolve it. But it's not just the APC where you have this kind of confusion, to use your phrase. You also have that confusion in the People's Democratic Party, the 2 dominant political parties in Nigeria, as it begins to appear that Nigeria is gradually, over time, moving towards a 2-party system. But what we demand as commentators, as analysts of the subject, is internal democracy, is transparency, is accountability, is putting the people first and making sure that all the gladiators involved, whether they are party chieftains or party chieftain followers, realize that this country is not about them. It is about us, we, the people, the first race in the Nigerian constitution.
Absolutely. Well, that's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Rota Sadiri, Michael Wilson, Adeswa Moran, and Aaron Akirjala to give us updates on Africa and global business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from South Africa.
China left its benchmark lending rate unchanged. Nikkei fell about 2%. There's been a slight improvement in that on suspicions that there might be a Biden-Putin summit coming up. But again, it's all Ukraine-led as we speak. In mainland China, the Shanghai dipped very, very slightly, and it held on to, China held on to its benchmark rate at 3.7%, and that was in line with all predictions there. So everything on course there as far as predictions are concerned. Now, some US listed Chinese stocks will need Beijing's permission to stay public in overseas markets. These are new rules from the Cyberspace Administration of China. They took effect last week, and they require Chinese with dual listings to be regulated by them. US-listed Chinese companies have pursued such listings as, of course, there have been tougher restrictions from the United States about all that. So that's another development of there. And the new rules also mean, and I think this is probably the most important point, that not all of them will find it to list on another market should they not list where they are at the moment. Hong Kong listed shares of the China intelligence company SenseTime, that jumped after investors, after its inclusion into the Hang Seng Tech Index. If you remember, it escaped, or it sort of moved itself away from Chinese jurisdiction by listing in Hong Kong and raising $740 million in December. It's now actually looking very, very favourable in terms of an investment because of its inclusion in this Hang Seng Tech Index. Let me recap the United States for you. And the Dow, as you probably know already, shed about 200 points on Friday for all the kind of reasons that we know at the moment. And everything is really just led by what's happening in Ukraine. And that situation changes minute by minute and hour by hour. We lead that, and most of the markets just taking the lead off news services like your own. Cape Town here in South Africa is going to source its own electricity by turning to independent suppliers. The state-owned Eskom has really been presiding over a blackout-prone economy, and whatever South Africa pretends to be, you don't get anywhere if the power's blacking out. It means absolutely nothing. So far, these independent renewables will only provide 300 megawatts of electricity a day. It needs 2,000. That's the total. Eskom is powered by aging coal plants, and they have long tried to rectify that. If you'll excuse the pun, they haven't. And it's also a big play by the Democratic Alliance, which rules here in Cape Town. It's the major opposition party to the ruling ANC. And many people in South Africa are very frustrated at the slow progress on reform as far as state-controlled industries are concerned under the ANC. It's election time in India. I draw this to your attention because in Punjab, it's called the grain state, and it's where farmers who've been smarting under the restrictions that allowed markets to open up to international competitors under Narendra Modi. It'll be a real test of him, and it carries a lot of votes. And his administration billed these things as necessary reforms to the farmers' markets. The farmers disagreed completely because they didn't want to be opened up to international competition, much in the same way that agriculture all the way around the world is very suspicious of international competitiveness. Let's move to the EU. The German Chancellor there, the new one, Scholz, has been saying that it's time for the West to work very hard to rid itself of dependence on Russian energy supplies. Some of us have been saying that for a very long time. He's actually grappling with this. We got the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is still awaiting approval from all sorts of authorities. He was speaking at something called the Munich Security Conference over the weekend, and he says that it would be a great mistake to actually detail the kind of sanctions that the EU and the other allies are planning to put on Russia should it be rectified, should it actually be proved that it's invaded Ukraine, and not to do anything to give them details of what they're going to do. So he's speaking quite strategically. As far as EU companies are concerned, there are still so many countries within the EU, so many differing bits of red tape and regulation. The EU itself is lagging behind the US. US growth of corporate overall has been about 19% in 2021. EU is only 11%. In the global top 100, the EU has 16 companies. The US alone has 58. That is the difference between the two. And more on that financial regulation. This is between the UK and the EU. You'll remember that the City of London, its financial services, risks being denuded by better conditions within the EU after Brexit. Now both sets of regulators are trying to rectify that, particularly this thing called Solvency II. Solvency II is a bit technical, but it relates to insurance companies, and it has, since the great crash in 2008, made insurance companies hold on to more cash to avoid them going insolvent, hence it's called Solvency II. But there's a competition to see if somehow insurance companies can be moved away from that. They have to hold less cash and therefore more investment in renewable and green things. That's where the race is at the moment. And finally, oil. That possibility of a Putin-Biden summit brought Brent crude back down to about 93.12, and it's on. And big oil itself is on course for £38 billion worth of share buybacks as well. These are companies like Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, and Chevron, because they've benefited so much from the rise in the oil price. So shareholders can not only look forward to dividends, but look also forward to share buybacks, which will increase the value of their own shares. That's the global view this morning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilson. I want to start in India. The farmers' protests have been in the news recently being compared, well, Modi's handling of those protests being compared with how Trudeau handled the protest that, blocks the bridge in Canada. And whereas Modi backed down without clamping down on domestic and foreign financial supports that the farmers got without resorting to any form of violence, Trudeau, obviously, we see that he took a different alternative. But now, all is far from forgiven, like you alluded to in your report there. The BJP is trying really hard to win that Punjab district by saying that the current ruling party there, the Congress party, is corrupt and inefficient and what have you. But even though the whole world congratulated the Indian farmers for standing their ground and doing so without violence, it was such a terrible price that they paid. 700 to 750 farmers died, either due to exposure and the terrible heat or the terrible cold, or suicide. It was just quite a bloody situation, even though there was none of the conventional violence. So I do wonder if all can really be forgiven at this point, even though Modi is offering free electricity to farmers, job creation and what have you, remains to be seen. I also wanted to talk about Credit Suisse with you this morning. And, they already had such a bad 2021 with over $1 billion being paid out in litigation, and they made almost $2 billion in losses. And now, really sordid allegations have been discovered now about Credit Suisse and some of allegedly illicit banking relationships that they have, including the Vatican and a 350 million euro fraudulent investment that's been alleged. And they have, accounts with alleged human trafficker from the Philippines, some billionaire who tried to have his Lebanese pop star girlfriend murdered. It's all looking extremely sleazy. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Idiri is here to give us an African business update. Morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to all our viewers. We start with aviation, Western Africa in Nigeria. There's been a big hike in domestic airfare that was noticed over the weekend. So I went to Abuja, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago to go moderate some economic panel. My economy ticket cost me about 23,000 naira to go, about 35 coming back, right? So that's about 50,000 overall round trip. Now, over the weekend, that's gone up by 60%. So your base fare, just heading out one way, you're looking at 50,000 naira, right? And coming back, it's even higher. The reasons why, the airline operators of Nigeria, AON, I bet they met over, I think it was on Thursday, and they agreed to hike prices. Why? Because of aviation fuel. And this is a stark lesson in deregulation and, how oil prices impact everything. So airfare, jet fuel, A1 is what they use, apparently is up about 110%. It was going for 190 naira per liter a year ago. And I think in Lagos it's about 400, in Abuja it's about 420, Port Harcourt is about 430. So, with fuel going up by about 110%, the airlines have decided to hike their rates. Now, there is one particular airline that operates a low-cost model that wasn't part of this, and they're going to stay out of it. But generally, they are all essentially hiking their rates. Now, if you think about how domestic airfare works, right, your revenues is your price times your volume. If they were able to have more flights, then maybe they could augment this increase one way or the other. But there's another issue with infrastructure in that nighttime flights, there's a window for you to land. There's the infrastructure that allows late flights to land late is just not there, basically lights. So out of, I think about 22, 23 airports that are managed by the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, only a handful have infrastructure that allows you, night gear that allows planes to land at night. I think it's in Abuja, Port Harcourt, Benin, Enugu, Kano, Kaduna, and a couple others. So, this lack of night flight gear basically limits how many flights they can have. If you're outside the 6:30 p.m. window, then you can't land and the flight gets canceled and you have to move on to the next day. So, but generally, I can imagine, not to give the government, to give them to be fair to the federal government, when you look at this whole issue of subsidies, I'm trying to imagine the type of conversation we would be having now if PMS was deregulated on what we'd be filling up our tanks with. Because we talked about the NARTO, the Nigerian Association of Road Transport Operators, and the fact that their trucks use diesel to move fuel from the depots to the fuel stations, they were complaining about diesel costs going up. That's over 400 and something per liter, or 390 to 400 a liter, and how that's impacting their margins. To the aviation folks, with the deregulation there of jet fuel, that market-based, prices of jet fuel, how it's affected them. You kind of see what the government is saying, resisting PMS because of the follow-through. But still, on the economic argument, that should have been deregulated. But, that's what we're seeing with aviation. Michael Wilson already touched on this because he is in Cape Town, vacationing in South Africa. But Eskom's struggles have essentially pushed Cape Town to look towards renewable energy and independent power providers. We know about the load shedding and all those. In fact, speaking of load shedding, Ikeja Disco here in Nigeria, they released a press release apologizing for lack of power. So that's also happening here. But pretty much, Cape Town is looking to independent power producers because of the issues with Eskom, load shedding, blackouts, and so on and so forth. But despite that, tourists are still going there because Michael Wilson's there right now. To Kenya. Kenyan bars are seeing a reduction in levies. Kenya, the county, Nairobi County has reduced fees for bars. So basically, you're looking at paying 50,000 shillings per year for the bars. I think they wanted to reduce it down to about 15,000 shillings a year. It's 30,000. They're also looking to reduce it to about, 15 for a year and then 20 or 25 for 6 months. But basically, bars in Kenya have been hit really hard by the COVID pandemic. It's reduced their revenue. So they went to their county and told them, hey, look, you need to reduce what we're paying in permit fees in order for us to stay afloat. So that's what's happening in Kenya. Back to Nigeria. Very interesting here. This is Vice President Osibanjo on his way to Bayelsa, where he was going to inaugurate a new road and also meet with traditional leaders. A lot of talk has been around his outfit, this particular, this outfit that he wore. And it made me think about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and how the uniqueness of Nigerian fashion, you're wearing a pretty unique number right now, Tundu. You can basically, with non-fungible tokens, if Vice President Osibanjo wanted to auction the digital representation of this outfit online, it could fetch a high price. And NFTs, non-fungible tokens, essentially are coded on the blockchain technology, assign a unique ownership to digital representation of assets. So, Tundu, you could be, if you were to win the auction and you purchase an NFT, which is a representation of Osibanjo's outfit, you would own the unique ownership of this particular asset. Now, the flip side of that argument is that this is from This Day newspaper. These pictures on This Day newspaper, it's on his social media, on his Instagram, on his Twitter. There are copies everywhere, but you would own the ownership rights to it as far as the blockchain is concerned. So that's the whole debate around NFTs as to whether or not they have any value is based on pretty much digital bragging rights. And I think there's something to be said here with that Nigeria has a very unique fashion that can take advantage of NFTs.
That certainly is.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
You go ahead, Dr. Abati.
Popular as non-fungible tokens have become. Who was that tech guy that promoted it? Is it Jack Dorsey, right?
Yes, a former Twitter CEO.
Yes, the big concern is that it's still an unregulated space.
Correct.
Almost like cryptocurrency.
Correct.
In many parts of the world. And because of that, we've also seen that despite the excitement about the possibilities that this offers, that there's also room for a lot of fraud. And there have been reports of people losing money because it's just strictly still uncharted territory and grossly unregulated. That's the point about non-fungible tokens. The second one, which should be of big concern to us, is the aviation space in Nigeria.
Yes.
You recall that in the face of COVID-19, there was this talk about bailout for the aviation industry in Nigeria, how the aviation industry globally has been most impacted, or if you like, the travel and tourism industry, and how governments were doing things. We used in those days to cite the example of what the US government did with the aviation industry. But the Nigerian government eventually came around. They promised 26 billion. Then they said they were going to release 5 billion bailout fund. I think at the end of the day, they released 4 billion bailout fund. But even that has not made any difference. It has not cascaded down in terms of the efficiency or the operational integrity of the airlines that we have in Nigeria. And the people always holding the wrong end of the stick are the consumers of aviation services. Either they go to the airport, they say due to technical, there's a way they phrase it all the time, due to technical difficulties, a flight that is supposed to take off at 8 a.m., you could be at the airport till 10 p.m.
Right.
And in terms of consumer protection, there's nothing. In terms of even the politeness of the aviation staff, there's nothing. We have had cases of potential passengers entering into fisticuffs with airline officials. Now you talk about deregulation, right? Okay, long before we started talking about PMS, the DPK is jet fuel,
Yes.
right? Have been deregulated. Diesel have been deregulated. But in the context of this scarcity that you have seen with PMS, following the importation of off-spec fuel, even the cost of jet fuel has gone up. Diesel has gone up. Diesel now is very expensive. It's about 500 naira per liter. If you run a house with a generator, you are in trouble.
Big trouble.
It's better now to just live in darkness. So this is the fallout that you have also seen in the aviation sector. We were told that 11 members of the Airline Operators of Nigeria, AON, they met, and on their own, they increased the baseline cost for airfares from maybe 30,000 naira to 50,000. But in reality, you can't get a seat if you don't have up to 62,000 to 92,000. And they did so almost with the speed of light. Persons were already at the airport Thursday, Friday. They were stranded. They could not travel. Okay? So what is the option that is available to Nigerians? If people are going to fix prices, is there a process in place? Where is the Consumer Protection Council in all of these matters? Okay? And some of these travelers who can no longer travel by air, which has now become very elitist, they will go by road. The road, the people who are waiting for them, kidnappers are waiting. Ritualists who want to harvest their body parts are waiting. If they go by rail, even the rails are not safe. So this is part of the crisis that we face. When there is a misalignment in terms of the economic indicators. You were lucky. You went to your Abuja event by air. Maybe next time you may have to go by road.
No, I will stay.
Don't even think about it.
We will go virtual if that's the case.
It's really unfortunate. Like you've just said everything. It's all about consumer protection and the fact that we always get the short end of the stick. About Nairobi, it's really interesting. At a time where governments all over the world are doing the government equivalent of, digging behind the back of your sofa, looking for bits of change, looking for money, they have actually been really responsive. They didn't just reduce it, they slashed it to 15,000 shillings.
Yes.
So that's very generous of them.
Indeed.
So what is that telling us about the premium the Nairobi government places on their bars and that entertainment scene? Is that
it's a high
really
premium?
Important?
Remember, there's an election here, so but still, but still,
because I'm very impressed.
But then you remember it was the operators of those bars that came to the councils and says we need to get a break in these fees. So maybe I'd be a bit cynical with the election talk, but they've approached them and said okay, they will consider it and then cut it. So it helps them because their margins have been affected by COVID. Yeah.
And as for ESCOM, anything that pushes people to look into renewable energy is a good thing.
Indeed, I mean it looks like where everyone else is going to be
heading
going.
there.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Independent power providers, renewables. Something has to happen because the power situation is still another big issue across the African continent.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic, Adeswa Omorwan is here with us. Good morning, Adeswa.
Good morning, Tundu, and good morning, Dr. Abati. I don't know about traveling by road to Abuja, but it's interesting we're talking about the aviation sector. Let me quickly bring you an update from
now that you
Brisbane.
talked about the aviation
Australia
sector,
had one of the most.
I was going to say that I hope these airlines will not start buying jet fuel from the black markets, which is the situation that many Nigerians are facing now. If we start using black market jet fuel, then of course you will all have to travel by road.
No, heaven forbid.
Well, I do hope not, indeed. And so to Brisbane Airport, very quickly, guys, since we landed with aviation, talking to Reuters this morning, there were cheers, emotional and jubilation at the airport as Australia opened its airport to fully vaccinated tourists for the first time in 2 years. And in Beijing, organizers of the Winter Olympics have described the game as successful because they recorded just 450 COVID-19 infections in the bubble, the Olympic bubble, throughout the games. They say that's a good number and it was successful. But the global figures this morning, so far, at least 424 million people have been infected since the start of this pandemic. We've lost close to 5.9 million people. And in the last 1 year since the first vaccine was administered against COVID-19, we now have 10.3 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines administered globally. Well, here in Nigeria, in the past 24 hours, there have been no COVID-19 related deaths, but there were 50 cases reported from 4 states, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. The latest data on COVID-19 vaccination, according to the agency in the country, shows that Katsina State joined states that have vaccinated at least 10% of their eligible population with a first dose of the coronavirus. The data also shows that Bayelsa, Anambra, and Imo states, these 3 states, have continued to be the lowest performing states since the mid of January this year. The numbers are very low in those 3 states when you look at the data and the information you have on your screen. Well, at least 65% of those vaccinated with first dose have now taken the second dose in these following states: Benue, Enugu, Jigawa, Katsina, Kogi, Taraba, and Yobe states. Well, Nigeria and 5 other African countries have now been chosen to establish their own mRNA COVID-19 vaccine production. This was announced on Friday by WHO boss Tedros Ghebreyesus. He says the move aims to ensure that Africa can make its own vaccines to fight, in fact, not just the COVID-19 virus, but other diseases in the future. Other countries are Egypt, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. These will be the first on the continent to receive the technology from a scheme headed by the WHO, which was set up sometime last year. Training is expected to begin next month. And Queen Elizabeth II, to know one of your favorite persons, has tested for COVID-19. She's said to be experiencing mild cold-like symptoms. Buckingham Palace says she's expected to continue carrying out light duties at Windsor over the coming week. She was first vaccinated early January last year. She's believed to have been triple vaccinated. The British monarch is turning 96 in April, and we do expect that she makes a full recovery thanks to the coronavirus vaccines she's had. And the positive test comes, as you know, as the government plans to roll back the remaining coronavirus restrictions, but there was no sign that the diagnosis of the monarch will deter or change the timing of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision. Since that announcement was made of the diagnosis, the Queen has received some get well messages, some goodwill messages from top British politicians, including the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Health Secretary Sajid Javid, and of course the Labour leader Keir Starmer. She also received a message from the WHO boss Tedros Ghebreyesus, who wished her a quick recovery. Remember that eldest son and his wife Prince Charles and Camilla tested positive last week. Well, to Israel finally, guys, where the country will open to unvaccinated tourists starting March 1st. Now, under this new plan, both vaccinated and unvaccinated tourists must, however, submit a pre-departure PCR test and, of course, also take another PCR test when they arrive Israel. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the Minister of Health in the country yesterday announced the plan to ease coronavirus restrictions, not just for tourists, but also education. Now for the education plan, the COVID-19 mandatory test for school children will also be cancelled starting on the same day, March 1st. Back to you guys.
Well, I'm dismayed to hear about the Queen at this one. Like you rightly observed, I love her. I think she's amazing. But I'm relieved to hear that hers is the mild variant and she has mild symptoms. And she said she's going to continue working. And we thank God for vaccines. I mean, when this pandemic first started, a woman of her age, she's 95 years old, COVID positive test results was pretty much a death sentence. But thanks to the vaccines, and she's been vaccinated 3 times, that, you know, we can actually have hope for a speedy recovery for Queen Elizabeth II. As for Israel, Australia, everybody really, I think, is just trying to recoup those billions of dollars, those tourist dollars. You know, Israel is just the home of religious tourism. So it's really good that this has happened. They've reopened. And Israel has been extremely careful. For them to be reopening, it does show that the world is moving to that endemic state that we've all hoped would happen sooner rather than later. But with this news of the Queen, it's a reminder that people are still catching COVID. And unfortunately, a small minority of people are still dying of COVID because they have not been vaccinated. So that reminder does need to be stressed.
Okay, I think we should join the rest of the world. You listed quite a number of people who have wished the Queen of England well. Well, add to that list the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, who this morning issued a statement, along with Boris Johnson and all the other persons you mentioned, wishing her, you know, quick recovery and a quick restoration of good health. The main concern, of course, is that the Queen is because of her age. She'll be 96 on April 21, and to have COVID, you know, would generally, naturally, you know, generate concern, considering our status and all of that. This shows that COVID-19 is no respecter of persons. Even when you are fully vaccinated, we're told that the Queen has taken up to 3 doses of COVID vaccine, and that, you know, she still gets the infection. But we wish her well, because, you know, the Queen is a sovereign. She's a symbol, not just in England, also across the Commonwealth. Now, as for Australia opening up, yes, you know, Australia had announced about 2 weeks ago that it was going to open up its borders. Travel and tourism is a major aspect of income in Australia. Foreign exchange, over 44.6 billion, you know, Australian dollars per annum as at 2018. But with COVID-19, that came down. But now that Australia has reopened its borders, the expectation is that, yes, the recovery in the tourism sector may take a while, but there will be a gradual recovery. That is hoping that another deadly variant will not show up. Now, in Israel also, it's also about travel and tourism. And Israel, like New Zealand, like Australia, is one of those countries that impose very heavy restrictions. But now, Israel is saying that from next week, travelers can come in, whether they are vaccinated or they are unvaccinated. All they need to do is to take a PCR test, you know, before they are allowed into the country. Israel is also, you know, at a meeting last week, decided to cancel what they call the Green Pass. The Green Pass allows you, you know, if you are vaccinated, to even access public buildings and public places. And from March the 1st, that would be set aside. So what we're saying is that after a pattern, after a fashion, many countries of the world are gradually opening up because of the level of vaccination that they have been able to achieve. In Europe, for example, you have Denmark, you have Norway, you have Austria, you have Germany also saying that it's going to relax restrictions. And even more famously, you have Britain, you know, England, saying that by the end of the month, you know, there will be a relaxation of restrictions, and Prime Minister Johnson is expected to come up with what he calls the Living with COVID plan. Finally, in Canada, the Freedom Convoy, the protest over, you know, vaccine mandate is petering out. But the issues remain. The issue about divisions in Canadian politics, the issue about misinformation, disinformation. 3, the rise of extreme populism that has been capitalized upon by politicians. 4, foreign interference. 5, you know, the popularity even of the Prime Minister himself. But what we have seen in Canada is that the clampdown, the declaration of an emergency situation, both in Ottawa and also by the Prime Minister, will seem to have helped the situation. But many issues still remain that Canada will still have to deal with going forward. Thank you, Adesso.